it beyond just a simple 2% number, then I feel very, very optimistic that NATO will be stronger 10 years from now, not weaker. There will be more NATO members, and I doubt seriously any NATO member would seriously consider withdrawing, certainly not the United States.
Senator Shaheen?
Well, I agree with that, and I also think if we look at what makes NATO relevant, it is security. And the threats to our collective security have increased over the last 10 years. They haven't gotten less. We're seeing threats to our cybersecurity. We're seeing the threat from Russia and aggression. We're seeing the threat from China in terms of its economic influence and what it's doing in the South China Sea. We're seeing a continued threat from terrorism. So the need to address those threats is not going to go away. And I think we will stay in Afghanistan. Just to be clear, there is support for that effort. And even though, you know, most of you know that we have three what we believe are co-equal branches of government in the United States, that the president submits a budget. His budget may have cut back in certain areas like support for Afghanistan and our engagements around the world, but Congress has put that money back in because we understand how important American leadership is in the world. And I think we also understand the threat from Russia and from Putin. You know, when the White House was talking about, in very favorable terms, about Vladimir Putin and refusing to acknowledge the Russian meddling in the U.S. elections, what Congress did was to pass sanctions on Russia by, in the Senate, 97-2, and overwhelmingly in the entire Congress, because we understand we've got to hold them accountable for what they do. That's what NATO's trying to do, and that's not going to change in the near term. So I agree with Senator Tillis. I think NATO is going to be stronger in the next 10 years, not weaker.
Thank you. President Ali.
Just two considerations. First of all, I agree that the public opinion changes very quickly with the young lady there. I have a personal experience in Italy, in my country. It changes in one sense and in the other one. Look, we have a new government, a new majority in the Italian parliament, formed by two so-called populist parties. Okay? One of those, 1 year ago, presented in the parliament a proposal of law for Italy to exit NATO unilaterally. Now, the party is saying, we have always supported strongly NATO. So, the public opinion behind this party is changing completely its opinion about NATO and about defense. So, there is a world which is communication, a world which is reality. I think that also President Trump has this double-track approach. I think that we have to consider that the responsibility of the media is very big. The web is also a fantastic phenomenon, but has also some disadvantages, as we know. So I think that the reality, for example, I have visited as president of NATO PA several times the eastern countries from Eastern Europe or the Western Balkans, regions which are very delicate from the point of view of geopolitical balances and so on. And except Serbia, for historical reasons, the bombings of Belgrade in 1999, all people there, 90% of the people want to join NATO. I don't think that in NATO countries there is 90% people willing to quit, to leave NATO. So I'm optimistic, I share the opinion of the senators. And regarding Afghanistan, I also think that all our countries are strongly committed to support Afghanistan until the ship will enter a safe harbor. I should not tell that being Italian with what is happening with the closing of the Italian harbors for the migrants, but that's another story. Just a point. The example of Afghanistan gives me the opportunity to say something on the burden sharing. If you look at the list of countries which has supported different missions in Afghanistan, you see how many young people have been sent there by several countries, not only by the US, and how the real contribution from the countries is not directly comparable with the budget of their countries. So we always say in our assembly that the burden sharing must be measured in cash, capabilities, and real contribution. We have some countries in NATO spending more than 2% and sending not even one troop abroad.
If I may, just on the point of Afghanistan, first, we avoided what I think what would have been a mistake, and that was drawing down our presences there far too early. But I think the real key to the long-term success in Afghanistan is continuing to work and assist the Afghan forces in defending their homeland. But it's also to focus on the economic component. It's to make sure that we get the infrastructure in place. When I was in Afghanistan, I met with President Ghani, and he had a very impressive vision about infrastructure, so that you're reaching out and building an infrastructure and an economy which needs to be moving while you're doing what you need to do to in terms of military operations. Economic operations are equally important. The two need to go together. And I think that's an area where NATO allies, if you take a look at other activities going on in areas where NATO forces are deployed, that there's an investment in there that goes outside of the military category that we have to look at when we're talking about our contributions. This is both military and economic. That total value of the relationship, I think, is something that we need to measure more closely.
All right. Now we go into our second round. I think we'll take maybe more than 3, because I have a long list of people who want to speak. Where? Yes, I saw that. Yeah, a huge number. I need to apologize to those. I can't possibly call on all of them. But let me start our second round of questions with a question of my own. Because I think that's an important question. One of my best European friends, great analytical mind, Ivan Krastev, who is from Bulgaria, he wrote yesterday that apparently the United States, meaning President Trump, isn't really interested in having allies. He is really looking at having fans or enemies. And the question that he raised, Ivan Krastev, in his brief think piece was, do we Europeans need to learn to live in a world where maybe the United States is no longer interested in allies? And what, if anything, would that mean? So I guess that's more a question to you, but also, of course, to the two senators. Now we'll go to the young man right in the first row, and then we will go to Lord Campbell, who sits way back and has been waiting for a long time.
Thank you, Ambassador. My question is for the two American senators. My name is Welton Chang. I'm a Millennium Fellow with the Atlantic Council, and I've actually coincidentally been a resident of both of your states, Hanover, New Hampshire, and Hope Mills, North Carolina. Although
I've been a resident of her state too.
I didn't get to spend much time in Hope Mills because I was in Iraq for the entire surge, 15 months. My question is about U.S. refugee policy and an issue that's affecting two NATO member states greatly right now, Greece and Turkey. We just came back from a study tour in those two countries, and we've seen firsthand how much the migration crisis has affected those two countries. We visited a school for young refugees, and one of the teachers asked a question to them, basically asking where they wanted to end up. And some of them said the United States. Right now, we are on track, our country's on track to accept the fewest number of refugees in the last 38 years since the passage of the Refugee Act. So my question to you is, as committed members to NATO, what more can we do on this issue? And how do we achieve bipartisan consensus so that we can push our country to do more on this, considering our American values? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Lord Campbell.
My name is Mingus Campbell. I'm from the United Kingdom, and I'm a Vice President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I was brought up to believe that it was Congress's responsible to use checks and balances against the actions of the executive. And I'm very pleased to hear that in a very practical way you've been doing that in the Senate. But may I counterintuitively ask you not to let go the idea of how much the European nations spend on defence? Now, don't excuse my own country from this. We claim to spend 2%, but we add in things like pensions in order to get to that number. And the real issue is not the percentage, but the quality of what you spend. And I hope, therefore, that you will continue to tell us the importance of interoperability and the need, therefore, to ensure that we invest in high-quality equipment so that we can stand side by side when necessary with the United States.
Thank you, Ming. I think that's a very important comment. We'll go to the young lady in the back. Yes.
Alice Panier, professor at Johns Hopkins University in DC. So a question for the two senators. The ambassador has noted that when you can't talk to the White House, then you turn to the senator. And I was wondering, from the part of European allies, how much of an evolution you've seen over the past 1.5 years in how they've engaged and sought to engage with you, with the Senate, and whether they've done so collectively or on an individual state-by-state basis. Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll go to the lady here. Second row, yes.
Thank you very much. Kirsten Jongberg, I'm an official working for the European Parliament. I just wanted to get the panel's reaction to what's coming out of the summit right now, which has gone into an emergency meeting of allies only, following President Trump's threat to pull out of NATO if the allies don't commit to the spending increases. So, wanted the reaction to that, but also your feeling on how much of a real issue that is. We've been talking a lot about public perceptions and how much this is a storm in a teacup versus a real sort of immediate issue.
All right. Thank you very much. There was one, the gentleman in the second row. You've been waiting for a long time.
Boy, somebody better be taking notes.
I was going to say, somebody needs to keep
remember the
here.
questions.
Thank you very much for your kind presentation. I think that I am Federico Llaniz, former Assistant Director of International Military Staff and retired General of the Air Force of Spain. I think that many years we have learned that the transatlantic link is an important, very important issue on NATO. And it's something that we preach to everybody, that one of the assets of the alliance is that we have assured the transatlantic link. So I can tell you that if we see that the public opinion see that the leader of the most important country of the alliance is somehow not very much clearly in favor of this link and is treating some of the partners of in the alliance in not in a favorable way, I think that will damage very much our public opinion. Please, senators, what can you do to avoid the destruction of that important link? Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take one last one, and then I'm going to ask Damon Wilson to read whatever is available in terms of report about last-minute developments over in the other less important room.
Thank you, Dr. Ischinger. My name is Vladimir Kozin. I am a commentator of the Russian MOD newspaper named Krasnaya Zvezda, or Red Star. I watched your conversation while sipping coffee. That's why I decided to intervene a little bit. Concerning annexation of Crimea, Russia never annexed Crimea. We reunited with Crimea. It was our territory from 1783.
But could you ask a question? Be kind enough to ask a question. We don't want any long presentations.
No comments.
Ask a question.
Comments. So what kind of questions if auditorium is wooing? No questions. As to sanctions, no sanctions can produce negative impact upon us. It more produces negative impact upon Europe rather than the United States. So they are irrelevant. But please go ahead if you wish so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Damon, can you tell us something? And then we'll go back to the panel.
Just very briefly, I think we're still getting a lot of reports, but from what we've heard from various sources, is that the president didn't explicitly threaten to pull out from NATO, but he did use harsh words in the session, as we understand this morning, with the presidents of Ukraine and Georgia, saying that there would be grave consequences if allies failed to increase their defense spending immediately. So he brought, I think, quite a bit of a harsh tone, which provoked Secretary General Stoltenberg to ask to break up the meeting, to ask the partners to lead, including the EU, and go into an allies-only session on this fair burden-sharing issue. So I think we've seen pretty strong rhetoric about the grave consequences and an offhand remark that we're hearing about the U.S. could go it alone, but not an explicit threat to withdraw from NATO, as has been reported from as we understand it.
All right. But it means that we're still in a kind of, if this meeting is not over yet, we're still in a kind of uncertain crisis moment. So let's go to the panel. Let's start with Senator Shaheen and conclude with President Ali.
Well, one of the reasons that Senator Tillis and I are here is to express the support that the United States Senate has for NATO and for our collective security. So I appreciate the concerns that have arisen throughout Europe and in other parts of the world about some of the president's statements. I can't control those. But what I can do is bring the message of where Congress and the Senate are with respect to support for NATO. And that's why we're here. That's why we traveled all night, so we could be here to share with you our interest in maintaining the strength of NATO and our understanding of how important it is to the United States. So that's the first point. I want to go back. There were a number of questions, and I can't remember all of them, but I want to go back to the issue that you raised about refugees and migrants, because as anybody who's watched television knows, that's a huge issue, not just in Europe, but in the United States. I was in Europe in 2015, in Greece, and then in Germany at the start of the migrant crisis here. And I saw the tremendous generosity of so many people in Greece who didn't have much, who were trying to help refugees, the generosity of the Germans in taking in so many migrants who were fleeing, in the most cases, conflict. There are economic refugees, obviously, but so many people at that time were fleeing the conflicts in the Middle East and Afghanistan and in conflict in Africa. I believe the United States should be doing more to allow refugees in. I am very distressed by the policy that has made such news around the world of taking children away from families at our southern border. That is absolutely inconsistent with America's values, with our belief that we are a country of migrants. That's what has made us strong. And I totally renounce that policy, and I think most people, regardless of our political affiliation, feel like that's wrong, and that's why the president was forced to issue an executive order undoing the policy. But we need to do more. Ultimately, the only thing that's going to address this long term, and we're seeing worldwide that the number of immigrants, the number of refugees is increasing. The only thing that's going to change that is for us to help those countries that are in economic distress, the developing countries around the world, be able to get economic security. And we have, I think, for those of us who are in wealthier countries, that we have a responsibility to try and help do that and to help figure this out. So I know this is a challenge that you all continue to face in Europe. It's a challenge that we face in the United States as well.
Senator Tillis.
The point on interoperability, by the way, I offer my condolences on the World Cup events last night. Congratulations to Croatia. There are two things. Interoperability, I think, is very important. The investment in quality is very important. But you also said something about interoperability that's also important to bring up. I'm very concerned with a NATO ally considering the purchase of a Russian missile defense system. That is just antithetical to the concept of NATO allies trying to increase interoperability, making sure that once you get in country, you're able to execute your mission successfully. With respect to the gentleman who commented on Russia, I couldn't disagree more with every word that he said. With respect to the gentleman on the refugee program, I'd like to point to work that Senator Shaheen has done on something that's very specific related to the Afghan interpreters. We're talking about people who have put themselves in harm's way alongside of American forces as interpreters, and that we would have any problem. They have to be vetted. For example, before they ever go alongside a special operator or someone else in country, they have to be vetted to begin with. They put their lives at risk. If they stay in that nation, they're most likely going to be killed or harmed. So that's clearly a case where we have to do more of that, and Senator Shaheen has led on that issue, and I've been very supportive of it. We need to address other issues. I was in Turkey at a Syrian refugee camp about 20 kilometers from the Syrian border. I want to applaud Turkey for the work that they've done. They've been on the forefront of trying to handle the refugee crisis, but we have to do more. All nations have to do more. Some of the other questions, to be honest with you, I'm a little bit foggy on. With respect to the events of today, again, ladies and gentlemen, the American Congress weighs in on all these matters. Unlike a Russia, where a leader can make a decision and execute it, we have co-equal branches that weigh into these matters, and decisions are not final until Congress has spoken.
Okay.
And we leave the rest of the questions to our Italian colleague.
Exactly. And thanks for the reassuring point.
No, I think that the question were almost all for you, but I take just 2 points. First of all, on Russia, well, I was personally visiting the front line in Ukraine, and I see that the war is real. It's not a fake news. So, Crimea, well, but now the war is in Donbass, and people in Mariupol asked me, why does not NATO help and support us? And they don't understand the reasons because of Article 5 is not applicable to Ukraine. Of course, it's not possible. But I saw personally the situation there. And I was personally strongly attacked by the Russians for my positions in favor of Ukraine, myself and the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. So it's not a fake news that Russians use all the instruments, the tools they can, propaganda and weapons to get to their. So I think that Russia still remains a big problem. No, another point on refugee. I think that you have. You told you have something more to do in the US. In Europe, we have to invest a lot on the development of Africa. And in that sense, Europe is essential. I think that the United States must be interested in the role of Europe towards the development of Africa. The European Union invested in cooperation projects last year more than 50 billion euros in Africa. That's the way. Not only cooperation projects, but also economic development using our enterprises who are there. Because development is the real condition for peace. Take Nigeria. Nigeria has 200 million inhabitants. In 20 years, there will be 400 million. What are we talking about if we don't consider those issues? So I think that also security is connected to development in those regions. And NATO opened a hub for the South in Naples, in the NATO base in Naples. And the hub for the South has the goal of understanding the root of the phenomena which stay below migration, terrorism, and so on. And that's very important political indication by NATO of attention to the southern flank.
Thank you very much, President Ali. I'm afraid this concludes the session. I'm told that we're already in overtime. I apologize to all those who wanted to speak and didn't get a chance. Let's give a vote of thanks to our wonderful panel, Senator Shaheen, Senator Tillis, President Ali. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Senator, great. Thank you.
What? I'm just going to update you on what is happening now. That session, for obvious reasons, lasted 50 minutes longer. It's been extended. There's drama happening up the hill. We're not sure what is happening at the moment, but we are going ahead now with the breakout sessions, and we'll keep you informed, and you'll be informed as well on your handsets. So the deal is, we're running late, lunch will be there, but other things may intervene. Please now go to your breakout sessions, and please, because of what is happening up the hill, be disciplined about getting back in here for 2:15. But there will be a breakout session here and 2 other breakout sessions there. But anything else might happen as well. It's a kind of unthinkable territory. Is that okay for the moment? Have I said the right thing? Good. Right. You're part of the drama now.
Can we ask for the streaming of the press conference?
It is being worked on, but there is a breakout session in here. It is being worked on, and I told you that I was updating you with the information I had at that moment.
Okay.
So it's being worked upon. It's being worked upon.